The night air outside Madison Square Garden was electric. Crowds pressed against the barricades, cameras flashed like a storm of tiny lightning bolts, and the sound of excited chatter filled the streets. The building itself seemed to glow under the city lights, a beacon of glamour and anticipation. Inside, preparations were in full swing for the celebration of a president's birthday. But no one yet knew that behind the curtains, a secret meeting was about to unfold. Marilyn Monroe stood in the dressing room, the soft glow of the vanity lights reflecting off her pale skin. She adjusted the white dress that had become iconic even before the night began. Her assistant fussed over her hair, smoothing out a few stray curls, and handed her the small microphone clipped to her dress. "You're ready," the assistant said, though Marilyn's nerves betrayed her. She could feel the weight of the audience waiting outside, thousands of eyes, eager to witness her performance. But more than that, she felt the weight of the secret she was about to step into. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her gown. The hallway leading to the stage was narrow, dimly lit, and mostly empty. Yet she knew someone was waiting at the other end. The thought of it made her pulse quicken. She walked slowly, each step echoing faintly on the polished floor. At the far end, standing just beyond the faint light spilling from the main hall, was John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States. Even in the low light, his presence was commanding. His sharp suit contrasted with the softness of her dress, yet there was a subtle warmth in his eyes, a recognition of the tension and excitement they both shared. "You're ready?" he asked quietly, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Marilyn nodded, a mixture of fear and exhilaration curling in her stomach. "Always," she whispered. For a moment, neither moved. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely between them, a quiet world, isolated from the chaos outside. In the distance, the muffled sounds of the audience preparing for the show created a surreal backdrop. They were alone in this small, intimate space, though they were about to step into the most public moment of their lives. The president's gaze softened as he looked at her. "It won't last long," he said, almost apologetically, "but for these few minutes, it's ours." Marilyn swallowed and nodded again. The unspoken understanding between them was clear. This was dangerous, yet irresistible. The kind of secret that could never be spoken aloud, yet would linger in memory forever. They moved together toward the backstage entrance. Each step brought Marilyn closer to the performance, closer to the crowd, but also closer to the eyes of someone who understood her in ways no one else could. In the distance, a security guard passed, oblivious to the tension-filled glance exchanged between them. Inside, the dressing rooms buzzed with activity. Assistants adjusted gowns and ties, musicians tuned instruments, and stagehands moved props with careful precision. Marilyn slipped past them, her movements graceful, deliberate, aware that every second counted. Kennedy walked a step behind, careful to remain unnoticed, blending into the flurry of preparations. She paused for a moment to check the mirror, her reflection revealing a woman poised, elegant, radiant, but behind her eyes was the nervous flutter of anticipation. Tonight was not just about a song or a performance, it was about a connection, fleeting and unspoken, that would exist only in these stolen moments. A voice from the hallway called out, reminding her that the time was near. Marilyn took another deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. She glanced over her shoulder at Kennedy, who nodded reassuringly. Together, they were about to step into the spotlight, but for now, in the brief seconds before the curtain, the world belonged only to them. The corridor ended at a small staircase that led directly to the stage. Marilyn's heart raced as she descended, each step echoing softly. Kennedy remained just behind, ensuring that their approach remained invisible to the eyes of the staff and photographers. Finally, she reached the edge of the stage. From there, the full scale of the event became visible, a sea of faces, lights and cameras, all waiting to witness her. But in that instant, the world outside the corridor seemed distant, muted, irrelevant. It was just her and the president, a private moment frozen in time, overshadowed only by the spectacle they were about to join. Marilyn positioned herself at the microphone, adjusting the clip one last time. She could hear the soft murmur of the orchestra tuning in the background. Kennedy stepped back slightly, giving her space, but the look he gave her was enough to steady her nerves. "You're going to be unforgettable," he said softly. "And you," she replied with a faint smile, "will remember this night." The orchestra began a subtle cue, signaling the start of her performance. Marilyn drew in a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of the lights, the cameras, and the crowd. Yet in the briefest heartbeat before she sang, she thought of the corridor, of the secret moment that had brought them together, and of the unspoken bond that would carry through every note. As she began to sing, her voice soft, seductive, and confident, the eyes of the world focused on her. Kennedy watched, a subtle, genuine smile spreading across his face. But the real secret, the one hidden behind the polished veneer of public performance, remained theirs alone. Even in the midst of applause, flashes, and the hum of thousands of spectators, the memory of the corridor, the quiet, electric tension, and the fleeting glance they had shared lingered. The world might see the performance, but only they would know the truth behind it, a secret that shimmered just beneath the surface of a historic night, destined to remain unspoken, yet unforgettable. The applause from the audience still echoed faintly backstage, a distant roar that seemed almost unreal compared to the quiet tension that lingered behind the curtains. Marilyn Monroe had finished the first lines of her song, and every eye in the room had been fixed on her. Yet behind the stage, a secret world existed, one that no one else could see. John F. Kennedy lingered in the shadows, careful not to draw attention. His sharp suit contrasted with the dim backstage lighting, but he moved with the ease of a man used to blending into formal chaos. Every so often, he glanced toward Marilyn, her figure illuminated by the stage lights, her presence magnetic. He felt a pull, a connection that went beyond the superficial smiles and political obligations. Marilyn returned behind the curtains, her chest still rising from the exertion of singing. The room seemed to breathe around her, filled with musicians, assistants, and staff, moving with quiet urgency. But in that moment, all of it faded. The corridor, the hallway, and the brief seconds they had shared before the performance surged in her mind, vivid and insistent. "Are you all right?" Kennedy asked quietly, stepping just far enough into the shadows to remain unseen. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, a concern that neither of them had spoken aloud before. Marilyn turned, her eyes locking with his. The moment was electric, charged with the awareness that they were taking a risk simply by existing in the same space. "I am," she replied softly, though her heart still raced. It's more than I expected." He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Some things are better in secret. No one needs to understand. Not tonight." The subtle tension between them was palpable. A shared glance, a brush of hands that could have been accidental or deliberate, sent shivers down her spine. Every step they took together backstage was measured, careful. They were surrounded by people, yet completely alone in their private world. Marilyn leaned against a wall, trying to steady herself. The dress clung to her in ways that seemed too perfect, the lights highlighting every curve and shadow. She could feel every eye on her during the performance, yet the memory of Kennedy waiting for her, the quiet reassurance in his presence, grounded her. "I keep thinking about that corridor," she admitted softly, almost as if speaking aloud would give the thought too much weight. Those few moments before the stage, it felt like time stopped. He nodded, understanding perfectly. "And now it's moving too fast. Out there, they see the performance. But back here, it's only us." A faint laugh escaped her lips, nervous yet genuine. It's insane, isn't it? How the world can see everything, and yet none of them know what really matters in a single moment. Kennedy's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. Sometimes the most important things are invisible to the crowd. They're meant to be seen only by the people involved. The orchestra tuned in the background, preparing for the next segment of the program. Staff moved with quiet efficiency, unaware of the brief, charged moments unfolding just steps away. Marilyn's hand brushed against the edge of the curtain, fingers grazing the fabric almost absent-mindedly, but the gesture held more meaning than either would admit. "You're going to finish the song beautifully," Kennedy said, his voice a gentle reassurance, almost intimate. "And after that, we have a few more moments." Marilyn's eyes widened slightly. She knew what he meant. Once the performance ended, the world would return with its applause, cameras, and public scrutiny. But the backstage moments, the stolen seconds of connection, were theirs alone. "I hope it lasts," she whispered, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Even if only for a few more minutes." "It will," he replied firmly. "As long as we're careful." The quiet tension between them stretched into several long moments. Every noise from the stage, every muffled clap or distant cheer, reminded them of the divide between the public and private. They were part of history unfolding, yet entirely removed from it at the same time. Suddenly, a hand lightly touched Marilyn's shoulder, startling her. She turned quickly, expecting a stage assistant, but it was Kennedy. Their eyes met, and the weight of unspoken words hung heavily in the air. It was a moment that could have been lost among the chaos, but they held it anyway. "I don't want to let go," Marilyn admitted softly, a confession meant only for him. "You don't have to," Kennedy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet." For several seconds, they simply stood there, side by side, the noise of the event fading into the background. It was as if the world had contracted, leaving only the two of them in the dim backstage light. The thrill of secrecy, the danger of being discovered, and the intensity of their unspoken connection created a bond that neither could ignore. But the reality of the night pressed in. The next cue from the orchestra signaled the continuation of the performance. Marilyn's lips curled into a faint, determined smile. "I have to go back out there," she said, almost reluctantly. "I'll be here when you return," Kennedy promised, giving her hand a quick, reassuring squeeze before letting go. She stepped back toward the stage, the bright lights washing over her once again. The crowd's applause was louder now, more insistent. Cameras flashed in a rhythm that almost seemed to echo the pounding of her heart. Every note of the song carried not just her voice, but the weight of the secret moment they had shared. Backstage, Kennedy watched from the shadows, his mind replaying the corridor, the brief touch of her hand, the nervous yet captivating glance in her eyes. The public saw only the song, the smile, the performance. He alone knew the truth, the stolen moments that existed in the space between them, electric and fleeting, like lightning captured in a bottle. As the song reached its crescendo, Marilyn's gaze briefly met Kennedy's. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared entirely. The audience, the cameras, the stage, leaving only the two of them suspended in that private connection. Then she finished the line, the applause erupting around her, and she returned backstage, radiant but composed. Kennedy moved toward her, careful not to draw attention, and for a moment, the chaos of the event felt distant, irrelevant. The secret that existed between them, the tension and connection that no one else could ever witness, remained intact. "You were incredible," he whispered, once she was safely behind the curtains. Marilyn smiled, the nervous tension melting into relief. "And now it's over," she said softly, but the way she glanced at him suggested otherwise. They both knew that the night was far from over, that more moments waited, moments that would be theirs alone. The backstage world continued around them, Assistants adjusting gowns, staff moving props, musicians preparing for the next cue. But in the dimly lit corners, a private story unfolded, electric and forbidden. For now, history would remember the performance, the song, the flashes of light, the glamour of the evening. But only they would remember the secret, the moments between the curtains, the stolen touches and unspoken words that made the night unforgettable. The night had reached its peak. Madison Square Garden was alive with lights, music, and applause, yet backstage, a different world existed, one of quiet intensity and stolen moments. Marilyn Monroe had returned from the stage, her heart still racing from the performance. Every eye in the audience had been on her, yet no one had seen what truly transpired behind the curtains. Kennedy waited in the shadows, his posture relaxed, but his gaze unwavering. For him, the performance had been more than a display of glamour. It was a continuation of the secret that had begun long before the song. He stepped closer as Marilyn approached, careful to remain unnoticed by the bustling staff and assistants around them. "You did it," he whispered, a mix of admiration and relief in his voice. "You were perfect." Marilyn smiled, the tension of the evening easing slightly. "Perfect?" she teased lightly, though her voice carried the lingering thrill of the forbidden. I could feel every eye on me. It was overwhelming. It was magnificent, he said earnestly. And yet, none of them know the real magic. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet backstage hall. "The magic?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "The magic that exists between us," Kennedy replied, his voice low, almost a secret in itself. "What happens here, away from their eyes, is what truly matters. History may remember the performance, but we'll remember this night." For a moment, the world felt suspended. The bustle of the backstage staff, the hum of the audience, and the flash of cameras became distant, insignificant. In that private space, Marilyn and Kennedy existed in a bubble of intimacy, a connection built on stolen glances, soft touches, and unspoken understanding. Marilyn reached out, her hand brushing against his. It was a small gesture, almost casual, yet it carried the weight of all the tension, anticipation, and excitement that had built throughout the evening. Kennedy responded with the same subtlety, allowing their fingers to linger together, grounding them in the fleeting reality of the moment. "You know we can't stay here forever," she murmured, a hint of longing in her voice. "No," he agreed, his gaze softening. "But we can savor it. Just for a little longer." The orchestra signaled the next segment of the program, reminding them that the world beyond the curtains demanded their attention. Yet they remained, stealing seconds, savoring a connection that was theirs alone. The thrill of secrecy heightened every look, every touch, every whispered word. Marilyn stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "I wish these moments could last forever." Kennedy's hand gently lifted to her cheek, a touch that was at once tender and electric. "Some things are meant to be fleeting," he said, "but perfect because of that. This night, we'll carry it with us, always." She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the reality of the statement sink in. The weight of the world, the glare of the public, and the scrutiny of history all faded. For this one moment, there was only them, a secret entwined with the thrill of the night. Suddenly, a noise from the other side of the curtain reminded them that the performance wasn't truly over. Marilyn straightened, her expression composed, though the faint flush of adrenaline lingered. Kennedy gave her a reassuring nod, their silent agreement clear. The world would not see, but they would remember. Stepping back toward the stage, Marilyn adjusted her gown and her microphone, ready to return for the final applause. Kennedy remained behind, watching her move with a quiet intensity, every motion etched in his memory. The audience erupted as she appeared once more, finishing her song with grace and charm. Flashes illuminated the hall, and every eye was captivated by her presence. Yet in Kennedy's mind, the most important image was not of the stage or the audience. It was the fleeting moments they had shared, invisible to all but themselves. As the applause reached its peak, Marilyn returned backstage one final time, radiant and composed. Kennedy stepped forward, careful to remain discreet, and offered a hand. She took it, their fingers intertwining in a gesture both intimate and public enough to remain unnoticed by those around them. "You were incredible," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers for a trace of the same exhilaration he felt. "And you," she replied with a faint smile, "were my reason for being brave tonight." For a few seconds, they simply stood together, the noise of the crowd and the bustling staff fading into a background hum. In that brief, suspended moment, the world outside did not exist. Only the secret they shared mattered, a bond forged in fleeting seconds but destined to last a lifetime. Finally, the reality of the night pressed in. Marilyn had to leave, and Kennedy had responsibilities to attend to. Yet neither of them moved immediately. Their final glance, lingering and loaded with meaning, spoke more than words ever could. "I will remember this night," Kennedy said softly, his voice carrying both solemnity and warmth. "As will I," Marilyn replied, her smile faint but sincere. "Forever." They parted, stepping into their respective roles in the public eye. Marilyn moved toward the exit, radiant under the stage lights, waving and smiling at the audience. Kennedy returned to the event, composed and poised, aware that the world would never know the full story. But the secret remained. A brief encounter, a stolen touch, whispered words and shared glances, moments that existed outside the glare of history, invisible to the world, yet unforgettable for those who experienced them. As the crowd continued to cheer, Marilyn walked toward her car, the city lights reflecting off her iconic white dress. Kennedy followed discreetly for a moment, then disappeared into the event, leaving her to savor the quiet aftermath. Both knew that this night, though fleeting, would linger in memory forever. In the end, history would remember a song, a dress, and a performance that captured the public's imagination. But the real story, the secret shared between a woman and a president, suspended in stolen moments of intimacy and thrill, would remain theirs alone. A night of glamour, of applause, and of historical significance had passed. Yet the magic of the corridor, the fleeting touch, and the unspoken connection would linger long after the lights dimmed, a reminder that some encounters, though brief, shine brighter than the world ever sees. The secret had been kept. The performance had ended. But the memory, radiant and electric, would endure forever.